The quantum entanglement sensors in the Zalaxian flagship's observation deck trembled, a microscopic vibration that most species would have missed entirely. Commander Vornak's third eye membrane flickered with irritation. Something was wrong, but the data streams suggested nothing out of the ordinary. Earth looked exactly as their centuries of long-range surveillance had predicted, a chaotic blue-green sphere of primitive technological development. Continent-spanning networks of rudimentary communication, fractured political systems, and what appeared to be laughably basic defense mechanisms. The planet's most advanced military technologies seemed to be projectile weapons and early-stage missile systems, trinkets compared to the Zalaxian Empire's quantum disruption cannons and phase-shift weaponry. "Preliminary scan complete," announced Sub-Commander Krell, her voice resonating through the ship's bioorganic communication matrix. "Planetary defenses are minimal. Population centers show no unified response capabilities. Recommendation: standard planetary subjugation protocol." Vornak's tentacle-like appendages moved across the holographic control interface, each motion calculated and precise. The Zalaxian invasion strategy had been perfected over 10,000 stellar cycles. First, disable communication networks. Second, neutralize potential resistance centers. Third, begin resource extraction. It had worked on 247 different planetary systems. There was no reason to believe Earth would be any different. Beneath the surface of that seemingly vulnerable planet, Maya Chen watched. Her monitoring station looked like nothing more than a standard server room in a nondescript data center outside Chicago. Banks of seemingly ordinary computer equipment hummed with an energy that was anything but ordinary. Each server was a quantum-encrypted node in a global network that had been decades in the making, a network the Zalaxians believed was nothing more than standard human communication infrastructure. "They're taking the bait," Maya muttered into her comlink, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that shimmered just beyond the perception of anyone who might glance over her shoulder. The bait was years in the making. Humanity had known about the possibility of extraterrestrial contact for far longer than any official government would admit. A global consortium, spanning scientific institutions, military research centers, and independent think tanks, had been preparing. Not with conventional weapons, not with massive spacecraft or planet-destroying technologies, but with something far more subtle and powerful: adaptive intelligence. In the server room, a series of algorithms began to pulse. Each was a living, breathing entity of computational potential. They weren't just programs. They were the result of decades of machine learning, psychological research, and a fundamental understanding of systemic adaptation that the Zalaxians could never comprehend. On the other side of the planet, in a research facility buried beneath the Andes Mountains, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez watched the first phase of their plan unfold. His team had spent years creating a global neural network that looked, to any external observer, like nothing more than standard internet infrastructure. "Incoming quantum signature," whispered an AI assistant, its voice deliberately modulated to sound almost human. Another layer of the elaborate deception. The Zalaxian ships were preparing their initial scan. To them, it was a routine procedure. Identify, assess, subjugate. What they didn't realize was that every single scan was being interpreted, analyzed, and transformed into a weapon. Maya's console erupted with a cascade of data. Millions of potential response scenarios were being calculated in microseconds. Not just military responses, but cultural, psychological, technological adaptations that would make traditional invasion strategies obsolete. "They see what we want them to see," Dr. Rodriguez murmured, watching the global network pulse with potential. On the Zalaxian flagship, Commander Vornak felt the first hint of something unusual. A microscopic anomaly in the quantum entanglement readings, so small that most commanders would have dismissed it as a calibration error. But Vornak was not most commanders. His third eye membrane pulsed with a subtle warning. Something about this planet felt different. Little did he know, humanity's first move had already been made. and the game had only just begun. The first Xylaxian ground units materialized with surgical precision, their biomechanical exoskeletons shimmering with phase-adaptive camouflage. Commander Zarek led the initial landing team, confidence radiating from every calculated movement. Preliminary scans had shown minimal resistance, scattered military installations, primitive defense systems, and a population more likely to panic than fight. What emerged from the ground beneath their landing zone was anything but passive. Nanite swarms burst through soil and concrete, a silver-gray tsunami of molecular machines that moved with impossible coordination. Each nanite was more than a simple machine. It was a computational node, part of a living, thinking network that had been decades in preparation. Tactical anomaly. Zarek's communication implant screamed with sudden panic. The ground unit's most advanced scanning technologies were being consumed, analyzed, and repurposed faster than their cognitive systems could process. In the underground facility beneath the Atacama Desert, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the first wave of alien invasion unfold like a carefully choreographed dance. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, each movement sending cascading instructions through the global adaptive network. "Initiate Protocol Prometheus," she whispered. Across the planet, what appeared to be ordinary infrastructure began to transform. Cell towers became adaptive sensor arrays. Solar panels morphed into quantum communication nodes. Even the most mundane pieces of human technology revealed themselves as components of a planet-wide immune system. The nanite swarms were just the beginning. Each Xylaxian weapon discharge was instantaneously analyzed by a global neural network that learned and adapted in real time. Quantum computers scattered across hidden research facilities processed invasion data at speeds the aliens couldn't comprehend. What looked like random technological responses were actually precisely calculated countermeasures. Sub-Commander Krell watched in growing horror as their most advanced weapon systems were neutralized. A plasma cannon designed to vaporize city blocks suddenly found its energy redirected, its molecular structure broken down and reconstructed into something entirely different. "It's impossible," Krell muttered, her bioorganic communication implants crackling with confusion. Beneath the streets of Tokyo, a team of young researchers transformed the invasion into a global collaboration. Teenagers and veteran scientists worked side by side, their communication transcending traditional hierarchies. Each piece of alien technology became a puzzle to be solved, a new frontier of understanding. Akira Nakamura, a 19-year-old quantum computing prodigy, laughed as she reverse-engineered a Xylaxian communication module. "They thought we were primitive," she said to her mentor, Dr. Rodriguez, who was monitoring the global network. "They don't understand that for humans. Every challenge is an opportunity." The global adaptive network was more than a defensive system. It was a living organism, with humanity as its collective consciousness. On the Xylaxian flagship, Commander Vornak realized something fundamental had changed. This was not a standard planetary invasion. This was a first-contact scenario unlike anything in the Empire's historical records. The nanite swarms began to construct something. Not weapons, not defensive structures, but communication arrays that pulsed with a complexity that defied the aliens' understanding of technological development. Dr. Rodriguez's voice echoed through the global network. "They came looking for a weak planet," she said. "They found a living, thinking ecosystem. Each nanite was a computational node. Each human was a potential solution generator. The entire planet was transforming into a single adaptive intelligence that consumed the invasion as fuel for its own evolution." The Xylaxians had initiated first contact. Humanity was about to finish it. "Initiate cultural resonance protocol," Dr. Rodriguez commanded, a smile playing on her lips. The planet held its breath. The real response was just beginning. The first transmission came as a fractal symphony, a complex mathematical and artistic composition that defied traditional communication protocols. On the Xylaxian flagship, communication specialists recoiled as the signal penetrated their most advanced filtering systems. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a message. It was everything. Fragments of human experience cascaded through alien communication arrays. A child's laughter from a refugee camp in Syria. The final journal entry of a deep-sea researcher moments before a catastrophic equipment failure. Mathematical proofs scrawled by a mathematician dying of terminal illness. Musical compositions created by individuals with severe neural disabilities. Protest songs from a dozen revolutions. Mathematical sequences that seemed to dance between pure logic and pure emotion. Captured Zylaxian Commander Zelrak found himself strapped to a neural interface in a containment facility deep beneath the Movav Desert. Dr. Arya Patel, a xenopsychological warfare specialist, watched carefully as the aliens' neural pathways began to fracture. Humans are not a species, Dr. Patel murmured to her colleague, Dr. Michael Chen. We're a collaborative problem-solving mechanism disguised as a biological entity. The neural interface began to play its arsenal of psychological triggers. Each memory, each fragment of human experience was a precision-crafted psychological weapon. The Zylaxians had conquered civilizations by understanding their weaknesses. Humanity was presenting them with something entirely different, a collective consciousness that defied traditional understanding. Zelrak's neural pathways began to break down. The Zylaxian mind, evolved for hierarchical thinking and linear conquest, couldn't process the non-linear nature of human experience. A single childhood memory of a human learning to ride a bicycle became a complex mathematical proof of resilience. A folk song from rural Argentina transformed into a quantum computational algorithm. We're not just breaking their communication, Dr. Chen explained to a global team monitoring the experiment. We're fundamentally altering their understanding of intelligence itself. On the Zylaxian flagship, communication systems began to destabilize. What appeared to be random noise was actually a sophisticated psychological assault. Each transmission carried multiple layers of meaning: artistic, mathematical, emotional, technological. A children's song, when analyzed by Zylaxian linguistic algorithms, revealed a complex computational sequence that began to eat away at their communication infrastructure. The line between art, communication, and weapon became impossibly blurred. Sub-Commander Krell watched in horror as their most advanced communication systems began to fragment. It wasn't a traditional cyber attack. It was something far more insidious, a complete reimagining of communication itself. They're not just defending, Krell whispered to herself. They're evolving in real time. In a small studio in Buenos Aires, a group of artists, musicians, and mathematicians worked in perfect synchronization. What they were creating wasn't art. It wasn't a weapon. It was a living, breathing communication system that would fundamentally challenge the Zylaxian understanding of intelligence. Arya Patel's voice echoed through the global network. Initiate full-spectrum psychological resonance. The assault began in earnest. Millions of human experiences began to flood Zylaxian communication channels, not as an invasion, but as an invitation. Each transmission was a challenge, a question, a moment of profound vulnerability and incredible strength. The Zylaxians had come expecting to conquer a planet. Instead, they found themselves confronting a species that understood conquest itself was an outdated concept. Commander Zelrak's neural interface began to pulse with something beyond information. It was understanding, and it was terrifying. Humanity wasn't just resisting. They were teaching, and the lesson was just beginning. The first captured Zylaxian combat module arrived at the makeshift research facility, hidden beneath an abandoned automotive plant in Detroit. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than a complex piece of alien machinery. To Dr. Camille Rodriguez and his team of global specialists, it was the ultimate puzzle, and their most exciting challenge. Distributed analysis protocol, Rodriguez called out, his voice calm despite the magnitude of their discovery. Within moments, high-resolution scans of the module were being transmitted to research centers across the globe. A network of makers, engineers, quantum physicists, and garage inventors began to collaborate in real time. They weren't just analyzing the technology. They were reimagining it. In a small apartment in Bangalore, Priya Sharma, a 23-year-old engineer who had been working as a network technician just weeks ago, began to decode the module's quantum communication matrix. Her fingers moved with a combination of mathematical precision and artistic intuition that would have been impossible to predict. "It's not just a communication system," she muttered into her global comlink. "It's a living computational organism." Across the planet, humanity's most incredible strength revealed itself. What the Zalaxians saw as advanced technology, humans saw as an invitation to innovate. The global maker community transformed the invasion into the most significant technological hackathon in human history. Teenagers in basements, retired engineers, cutting-edge research teams, all working with a level of collaboration that defied traditional scientific hierarchies. A research team in Seoul discovered that the alien energy modulation could be repurposed into a revolutionary clean energy system. Another group in Lagos found that the combat module's quantum encryption could solve long-standing problems in global communication infrastructure. "We're not just reverse engineering," Dr. Rodriguez explained to a global network of researchers. "We're evolutionary engineers. Every piece of alien technology is an opportunity to reimagine our own potential." The Zylaxian flagship's communication systems began to pick up fragments of these developments. What should have been a simple invasion was turning into something entirely unexpected. Humans weren't just defending, they were transforming the very concept of technological development. A quantum computing cluster in Sao Paulo began to develop a communication protocol based on the alien module's quantum entanglement principles. But instead of a military weapon, they were creating a system that could revolutionize global education, medical research, and environmental monitoring. Sub-Commander Krell watched in growing horror as human research teams began to produce technological innovations that made the Zalaxian systems look primitive. A communication module that took their engineers decades to develop was being comprehensively understood and reimagined within hours. In the abandoned automotive plant, Priya Sharma made a breakthrough that would change everything. "The module isn't just a piece of technology," she announced to the global network. "It's a form of distributed intelligence, and we can do better." Within hours, a collaborative team had developed a communication system that didn't just match the Zylaxian technology. It transcended it. Using principles of human creativity, collective intelligence, and adaptive learning, they created something entirely new. The Zylaxian invasion had become a global collaborative project. Garage inventors in Mumbai worked alongside quantum physicists in Cambridge. Network technicians in Nairobi collaborated with retired NASA engineers. The hierarchical limitations that typically constrain technological development simply ceased to exist. Dr. Rodriguez's voice echoed through the global network. "They came with technology. We're responding with imagination." Each captured piece of alien equipment became a node in humanity's greatest collaborative project. Not a weapon of war, but a platform for understanding. Not a system of conquest, but a mechanism of collective growth. The Zalaxians had arrived expecting to find a primitive civilization. Instead, they found a living, thinking, creating ecosystem. And they hadn't seen anything yet. The transmission began as a whisper, then became a symphony. Global communication networks erupted with a cascade of human expression that defied every known principle of interstellar communication. It wasn't a message. It was a living, breathing entity of cultural complexity that would shatter the Zalaxians' understanding of intelligence. In a small recording studio in Dakar, a group of musicians began a performance that was simultaneously a musical composition, a mathematical theorem, and a psychological warfare protocol. Aminata Diab, a sound engineer with a background in quantum linguistics, led the team. Each note was carefully constructed, a harmonic sequence that carried layers of meaning incomprehensible to linear thinking. The Zylaxian communication arrays began to fragment. What appeared to be a simple musical performance was actually a multi-dimensional communication weapon. The rhythms encoded quantum computational sequences. The harmonies carried psychological trigger points. The very structure of the sound challenged the fundamental communication principles of the Xylaxian species. Commander Vornak watched in growing horror as human cultural transmissions began to penetrate every level of their communication infrastructure. It wasn't just information. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of meaning. A children's cartoon from Argentina contained a complete mathematical proof that undermined the Xylaxians' understanding of quantum communication. A street art installation in Tokyo became a complex neural network mapping communication pathways. A piece of experimental music from Berlin carried within it a complete deconstruction of the aliens' communication protocols. Dr. Elena Rodriguez coordinated from the Global Communication Center. Culture is not just expression, she explained to her team. It's our most sophisticated adaptive technology. The Xylaxian linguistic analysis systems began to break down. Each human cultural transmission was a multi-layered puzzle that defied traditional comprehension. A simple folk song from rural China contained within it a complete reimagining of communication theory. A graffiti mural in Sao Paulo was simultaneously an artistic expression, a mathematical algorithm, and a psychological warfare tool. Sub-Commander Krell watched in growing panic as human cultural transmissions began to consume their communication infrastructure. These weren't just messages. They were living, breathing entities of collective intelligence. In Buenos Aires, a group of artists, mathematicians, and linguists worked in perfect synchronization. What they were creating wasn't art. It wasn't a weapon. It was a complete reimagining of communication itself. "We're not just communicating," said Marco Ramirez, a visual artist with a background in quantum computing. "We're demonstrating the fundamental nature of human intelligence." Each transmission carried multiple layers of meaning. A simple poem contained within it a complete deconstruction of the Xylaxians' understanding of linear communication. A street performance became a complex neural network mapping alternative forms of intelligence. The global human network transformed the invasion into the most significant cultural exchange in galactic history. Artistic communities in Mumbai collaborated with mathematicians in Moscow. Musicians in New Orleans worked alongside quantum physicists in Singapore. The traditional boundaries of human expression dissolved, creating a living, breathing communication system that was simultaneously art, science, and warfare. Commander Vornak realized something fundamental had changed. This was not a standard planetary invasion. This was first contact with a form of intelligence that defied every known principle of communication. "They're not just resisting," Vornak muttered to himself. "They're teaching." The cultural transmission reached its peak, not as a weapon of destruction, but as an invitation to understanding, a complete reimagining of intelligence itself. And the Xylaxians were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology. It was its capacity to transform everything it touched. The real invasion was just beginning. The pathogen materialized in the Xylaxian laboratory with clinical precision, a biological weapon designed to decimate human populations within hours. Commander Zelrak watched through reinforced observation screens, confident in the genetic warfare technology that had subjugated hundreds of civilizations. Dr. Imani Okoro knew better. In the underground genetic research facility beneath the Kilimanjaro Research Center, her team had been preparing for this moment for decades. The first global genetic defense network was about to become something far more extraordinary. "Initiate adaptive response protocol," she commanded. Across the planet, volunteers connected to a global genetic monitoring system. What the Xylaxians saw as a weapon of destruction became humanity's most significant evolutionary opportunity. Each infected individual transformed into a living computational node, their biological systems adapting in real time. The pathogen entered human cellular structures and found something entirely unexpected. Instead of breaking down human DNA, it encountered a living, adaptive genetic network that had been decades in preparation. Quantum-encoded genetic markers began to interact with the alien biological weapon, not just defending against it, but actively learning from its molecular structure. In Sao Paulo, Maria Rodriguez, a 27-year-old genetic researcher with a rare immune disorder, became the first breakthrough point. Her body didn't just resist the pathogen. It began to transform it. It's not about survival, Dr. Okoro explained to her global team. It's about transformation. The human genetic network worked like a massive, distributed intelligence system. Each infected individual became a research point, their biological responses analyzed and integrated in real time. What should have been a devastating attack became the most significant collective biological experiment in human history. Zalaxian scientists watched in horror as human genetic structures began to do something impossible. The pathogen wasn't just being resisted, it was being understood, integrated, transformed. Commander Vornak received the first alarming reports. Human populations weren't dying. They were evolving. In a small research facility in Nairobi, Dr. Okoro and her team watched as the global genetic network began to reveal its true potential. Each infected human became a living sensor, their bodies transforming the alien pathogen into a tool for collective understanding. "We're not just defending," Dr. Okoro said quietly. "We're expanding the very definition of human potential." Genetic markers began to shift. Immune responses became more than just defensive mechanisms. They became adaptive learning systems. The line between biological defense and technological innovation disappeared entirely. The volunteer in Mumbai discovered that the pathogen interaction had enhanced his neural plasticity. Another in Toronto found increased metabolic efficiency. In Buenos Aires, a researcher noticed quantum-level changes in cellular communication. The Zalaxian biological weapon had become humanity's most significant evolutionary catalyst. Sub-Commander Krell's communication systems erupted with impossible data. Human populations weren't just surviving the pathogen. They were fundamentally changing. Genetic structures that had been considered fixed were now fluid, adaptive, constantly reconfiguring. "They're not a species," Krell whispered in growing terror. "They're a living, adaptive system." In the Kilimanjaro facility, Dr. Okoro made a breakthrough that would change everything. The pathogen wasn't just being resisted, it was being transformed into a tool for collective human evolution. "We're writing a new chapter of biological intelligence," she announced to the global network. Each infected human became a research point. Each cellular response became a piece of a larger, more complex understanding. The traditional boundaries between individual and collective, between biological defense and technological innovation, simply ceased to exist. The Zalaxians had arrived expecting to find a vulnerable biological system. Instead, they discovered a living, thinking, evolving ecosystem. And humanity was just getting started.